The Ballad of Blonski. Graduation weekend that year had come at the halfway point in May. By that time, I and a few friends had bootlegged about 40 liters of apple wine using apples taken from the calf, along with some store-bought simple yeast and a bunch of 2 to 3 liter plastic jugs we had gotten from the dollar store by just buying like $1 or $2 sodas. Real cheap stuff. It had taken us weeks, and the best stuff we reserved for ourselves using this coffee machine that we had practically destroyed by putting Moxie through it. It's a New England thing, don't worry about it. If you ever have the chance to try it, I would suggest not. It's not exactly popular for a reason. Of 40 liters of apple wine, the vast majority of which we then gave to the freshmen for free, as a gift. Now, a gift that was a double-edged sword, given that they had to also set up for graduation weekend and take down. So doing that hungover in the heat of May, I can't imagine had been pleasant, but for a lot of them that were hungover, kind of don't feel sorry. Anyway, it was the Friday night, right before graduation. Families were arriving, finals were over, everything was all set, and we had all gone out to a freshly mown, and by that I mean clear-cut section of the woods where we piled up a bonfire. I was there having, I think, a drink. Didn't even have that much. When she walked over, she was talking with somebody. They asked her where the guy that she had been dating was. She looked at me and goes, "I don't know. Where is he?" He and I had become drinking buddies, much to the chagrin of his older brother, who had been a classmate and not one who was really fond of me. I didn't know at the time that he had been sleeping with his ex. And they hadn't been official, so I'd never really dug real deep into it. Let's just say she didn't stay with him. And what happened that night was certainly not planned by me. Then again, I had told her very early in the academic year that I had fancied her. So, I guess since I was at that point 2 months single, she felt it an opportune moment. Well, for whatever reason, didn't matter. I didn't expect anything of that weekend. Especially and certainly not what it became. Anyway, we'll skip all of the sordid details. So, much to my surprise, when less than a month later I get the call for John Blonski's death. I got approval from my internship that I had only been working in for about 2 weeks, I think, to take Friday as well as the following Monday to travel back to the campus I had just left for the funeral. Also, around that time, just a few months earlier, had been released the album Wero by Beck. This music I had off and on again enjoyed growing up, but that one really caught my attention somehow. That one really inspired in me a desire to actually start writing music, thinking about it. I was getting more and more into the music by Beck. For that weekend, I had picked up the album, oddly enough, coincidentally enough, Sea Change. I didn't know at the time that it would play out like a lot of the album. That weekend, that is. I flew out and, of course, got hit by a massive delay as we got into Detroit, my least favorite airport. Just a mile or more stretch of shopping and gateways and awfulness. I hate going through that airport. Such an annoyance. And as we got in and we were waiting, apparently, because of delays, the pilot that we currently had flying would go over the FAA limit. And so we had to sit on the tarmac and wait for about an hour and a half for a replacement pilot to be driven in. He said that we could exit the airport to go have a cigarette if we had wanted, which turned out to be a lie. No joke. There was no security checkpoint that was open coming back in. I had to let them know. And one security officer was nice enough to let me back in. Because after several hours on a plane, I definitely wanted a cigarette. A sandwiched middle seat between two businessmen complaining about flying Continental. I got in late, and she picks me up from the airport. Oh, I melted when I saw her. And in the car, she joked that she was half tempted to run up and just leap on me and plant a kiss on me. And I said, you should have. But instead, she had brought my favorite drink at the time, Sambuca. I know, it's weird, but it has special memories for me. Especially drinking Caffè Corretto con Sambuca in Italy when I had studied there. You could get it on almost any street corner. Every cafe, you could get Caffè Corretto. Coffee correct. And I don't know why. I'm not even a coffee person. I'm not really an espresso person. But it just works. Try it sometime. Drank half the bottle. Spent the entire next day hungover. But I also got to spend it with her. And it was a nice day. In spite of myself. Finished the day by watching a movie together. In an empty dorm where I and several others were secretly hiding. The school understood. We were back for our classmate. So they didn't really care too much. They looked the other way. I appreciate that. That was the last day spent together. The next day was a bunch of us piling into a car to drive all the way from New Hampshire out to the middle of nowhere, Jersey, to pile into two separate hotel rooms and a little roadside stop. Girls in one, guys in another. But first came the wake, so we dropped our things off at the rooms, got dressed, made ourselves appropriate, and went to the wake. The general mood was somber, but not devastated. In fact, it might have been the least just outpouring of sorrow I've ever seen at a wake, but got to meet the family, and they were really nice, sincerely. You could see where John had gotten all of those good qualities. After that, a quick dinner, and a final look. She glanced back as I went to a separate hotel room. And then sleep. I remember the end of the dream. I was looking at a letter from a friend standing next to this telephone alcove in the once convent turned hostel where I had stayed during my time in Rome. a letter with a picture pointing out my friend's crush. And as I finished reading that letter, I noticed sticking out of my forearm a splinter. Didn't feel painful, but generally in dreams, I don't have sensation like that. And I tugged at it, but as I tugged, the skin began to stretch and it revealed itself to be less one splinter and more almost like a bundle. And as I pulled it free of my skin, I felt, oddly, the warmth of the fluid drained and drip and trickled down my arm. As what emerged from the loose skin were 3 worms joined at the base, writhing. And then I woke. Found myself laying headfirst behind the TV in a room full of either recently graduated or yet to graduate college guys. An unsettling dream. A vivid one at that. Not the usual tone. Of course, like I said, generally don't feel sensations in my dream. Not pain, not warmth. But it's the morning of a funeral. What do you expect? Got dressed, made myself presentable, met everyone downstairs. She's keeping her distance. Wanted us kept under wraps. I thought it was kind of understandable given the circumstances of my best friend dating my ex, who was also her close friend. But it wasn't the first or the last time somebody kept our romantic association secret. The funeral itself was a traditional mass. Beautiful church. Nothing really much to mention. The deceased's brothers, by which I mean both family and religious order, they carried his casket to his place of rest. Beautiful little spot that seemed nearby adjacent to a hill slope, so it almost created this pastoral effect. It was a sunny day, fairly warm, bright, a little humid as Jersey can be in the summer. I hadn't gone to mourn, but just to pay my respects to someone who had always shown kindness and restraint and intelligence. A genuinely good person by all accounts and appearances. But as we approached the end of the service, suddenly his religious order brothers began to sing. They sang, the second one was Ave Maria, but the first song had been an old German song that they had translated. My comrade. Fighting bravely in the battle, galloping on and on, riding in the ranks of horsemen, thou wert my dearest comrade, thou the one I love the most, thou the one I love the most. An arrogant cavalier, the strongest of his corps, lunged at me in thirst of blood, but thy faithful heart showed no fear, and thy heart the lance did find, and thy heart the lance did find. I've avenged this mortal wound that thou received in my stead. Deep and deep into the dark of night, I have wept for thee, my comrade, kneeling by thy holy grave, kneeling by thy holy grave. In my sadness, how I wander. Without meaning, I must ride. From this oh so deadly ambush, I have lost my dearest comrade. I will never laugh again. I will never laugh again. O Prince, pray thee, hear my ballad. Listen to my pleading call. I pray God, who loves the soldier, to quickly place my comrade at the right of Christ the Lord. At the right of Christ the Lord. I'm not familiar with the song, and the tune is something that escapes me like a dream on waking. It's almost there, but it's never quite. But I remember hearing their song, and whatever it evoked in me, however, is I was crying. I could not hold back tears. I was crying. I still don't know why, but it just grabbed me like that. I stood there in the sun, wiping tears away from my face. For a person I hadn't come to mourn, but to respect and celebrate. I don't know why. But it was sad and beautiful. After the funeral ended, we all departed and went to a lovely reception where there was plenty of food and drink and laughing, and honestly, it was probably the most wholesome and pleasant thing I could have imagined for a funeral reception. It was strange, in a good way. I've never been to a reception after a funeral that had more laughing or just people sharing such enjoyment of each other's company. It was nice. There's no real pretentious way to put it. That everyone was having a good time. We were glad to be there. We were glad to have paid our respects. We were glad to have had John in our life. But for me, something was still off. I was starting to notice certain avoidance. I don't know how I clued in to what was coming next, but I did. And I was almost immediately embittered by the choice of music for that weekend as Sea Change. Everything that played out came down to 3 songs: Golden Age, Paper Tiger, and Guess I'm Doing Fine. The last being almost verbatim the events that came on that day. I'd been told everything was fine, but I knew somehow, I don't know why. I knew that the end was coming. 7 hours in a car next to her. She makes sad faces, and I listen on repeat to Sea Change. All the jewels in heaven. They don't look the same to me. But now I bade a friend farewell. I can do whatever pleases me. 7 hours of knowing what's coming. It's the anxiety, the anticipation that will kill you. We got back to an empty campus. All the battlements were empty and the moon was hanging low. And took a walk to the corner between the college and the Y. And there I was given the killing blow. You'd be the perfect person to marry someday. It wasn't the timing that it was happening the same day as a funeral for a classmate we both knew. One that I respected. It was those words. The perfect person to marry someday. Overtures of how she didn't think that this was the last of us. All of which told me that if it wasn't, then she was just keeping me on the shelf. I wasn't pretending to be some kind of nice guy. I was never given the real reason why. And I guess, given my past before that, the prospect of being told to wait on a shelf was contemptible. And if I were being really, really honest with myself, I was just heartbroken isn't the right word, more like eviscerated. Impaled upon my own pride that everything that I was that made me worth being with, worth loving, worth having in someone's life wasn't what was wanted. And I could accept that, but for the idea that we weren't done. That I was just being asked to wait on the shelf. And I was. That wasn't the last time we spoke. Wasn't even the last time we saw each other. Hell, it wasn't even the last time we kissed. The next time would be Easter 2006. But it was probably the first time, but not the last, that I just got tired of being alive. I didn't want to off myself. I refused to use the word unalive, and humanity should be ashamed that that's what we've had to resort to. Suffering from ideations of harm requires people to be able to talk about it. Well, unfortunately, back then I wasn't able to talk about it with anyone either. Everybody else had their own problems. Hell, my own friends stopped returning my calls. That was the start of what I considered my own personal diaspora. What followed within the next year proceeded as such. Find out that one parent has been cheating on the other. The marriage begins to crumble. Things become hostile, erratic, and even unhinged in the household. My older sibling about to graduate, single mom already. Still very difficult to be around, very difficult to deal with. But now I have to, at least for a time, because it turns out I can't go to the grad school to which I was accepted over in Belgium for philosophy. No. Part of the reason being that a bit of my student loans hadn't gone to my education. It had been taken by one of the parents, which came out in the divorce. My family fell apart. I fell apart. I left the country within a year and a half. That's how I ended up in Korea. Things were so miserable that I left for a place I knew nothing about, had never even bothered to study much about. I just wanted out. And if it meant the end of me, then so be it. Because, well, as I once wrote, like a decommissioned soldier, my blood began to rust, longing for one last year battle where I joined the dust. I was tired of living. Didn't want to off myself. Didn't want to tag myself for the deep six. If we have to use euphemisms for this sort of thing, I don't think I'm going to go with unalive. But that didn't mean that I wasn't hoping for an early exit at that point. Looking for an emergency exit as best as I could, and flying to a place I'd never been before the age of the smartphone, of course, which I wouldn't know about until years after. But that actually seemed like a quick route, because either way, either I died, in which case I wouldn't have to bother with any of this anymore, or I'd live, but it wouldn't be here. I don't know that there was a worse way to leave me hanging. And I tried writing multiple emails asking for a clean cut, just a clean cut. Several of which she admitted at one point to having ignored. The last time she attempted to reach out was 2019 through LinkedIn. 10 years after I had kind of told her off. Not cursing or any of that, just I had received a Valentine's greeting on my social media page. Kind of made it clear that my then girlfriend wasn't exactly thrilled about it. So, yeah. I think it was about a year later that I had received a message saying, I don't even know what we were arguing about. Check the timeline, just so happened to be 3 days after she had gotten married. And then a year after that, a message saying, I'm so sorry. Could you ever forgive me? But I never responded. I didn't respond because how is that fair to anyone? Any of those messages, do you think that she had asked her spouse? Told her family she was going to reach out to her first boyfriend, let alone first sexual partner? It wasn't that I hadn't forgiven her, it's that I needed to walk away. We were young. She was stupid. Not really, but, ignorant of how to handle things and doing so with the best intentions, kinda. Who cares? I got over that. Clearly, it was a rough time and it was the start of a very dark period that kind of led me to where we are now. But I never responded because it wasn't fair. Not to her spouse or her kids or to me. If you ever hear this, understand that I did forgive you, but you and I are never going to talk again. And I would really appreciate it if you would stop trying to get back in contact with me every few years. I forgave you already, but at least have the decency to pretend I'm dead. Sometimes it's kind of close to the truth. I will tell you one thing. I'll never kiss a gun street girl again.